It's recognized.
Mom? That's so pretty.
Aww. Oh my goodness.
It is so light and flowy.
It is. Oh my goodness. It is so light.
You look like my mom.
A wedding is supposed to be the one day where family sets aside their differences, where the focus is on love, joy, and a new beginning. But for the Plaths, Lydia's wedding turned into something very different. Instead of unity, instead of celebration, what we saw was blood, tension, and a family fight that no one could ignore. Micah showed up looking bloodied and stitched, a shocking reminder that this family's fractures don't disappear just because someone walks down the aisle. It was the kind of moment that left fans gasping, asking how a day that should have been filled with happiness spiraled into something so ugly. Hi friends, I'm Sophie, and this is Reality Scandals Daily. If you love following the truth behind Welcome to Plathville's most dramatic moments, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments how you felt when you saw Micah at the wedding. Did it break your heart, or did it confirm what you've always suspected about this family? Because here's the thing, Lydia's wedding was never just about Lydia. It became a stage where every buried grudge, every old wound, and every family loyalty test came roaring back to the surface. From Micah and Isaac's explosive clash to the way outsiders like Olivia and Veronica have always been painted as scapegoats, this wasn't a wedding. It was a battlefield dressed up in flowers and vows. And what makes it even more shocking is that everything I'm about to walk you through is right there in the episodes. No rumors, no made-up stories, just the raw truth of what aired on TLC. When Lydia first started talking about her wedding, fans hoped it might be the moment where the Plath family could come together, if only for one day. Lydia has always been the sibling who leaned into the family's traditions, the one who seemed determined to keep peace, no matter how complicated things got. So when the news of her wedding came out, people imagined a joyful reunion, a chance for the Plaths to prove that even after years of fighting, heartbreak, and division, they could still rally around a sister starting her new life. A wedding is supposed to heal. It's supposed to be symbolic, a clean slate. But instead of bringing the Plaths closer, Lydia's wedding ended up showing us just how far apart this family really is. The contrast between what we expected and what actually unfolded could not be sharper. On paper, it should have been the picture-perfect Southern wedding. Lydia radiant in her dress, siblings gathered with smiles, parents proud even if they're no longer together. But Welcome to Plathville has never been about surface-level perfection. The cameras don't lie, and what we saw on screen was a family walking into that wedding already carrying years of tension, distrust, and heartbreak. You could almost feel it in the air. The smiles felt forced, the hugs stiff, and the undercurrent of hostility impossible to ignore. Part of that weight came from the obvious elephant in the room, Kim and Barry's divorce. This wasn't just any split. This was the dismantling of the very structure the Plath kids had been raised to believe was unshakable. For so many years, Kim and Barry represented strict order and control, even when their rules were suffocating. And when that marriage collapsed, it didn't just free the children from the tight grip of their upbringing, it also left them more divided than ever. Some siblings still cling to their mother's way of doing things. Others lean toward Barry's quieter stance, and others want nothing to do with either parent. All of that history came with them into Lydia's wedding day, and you could see how hard it was for anyone to just play happy family. Even before the fight that left Micah bloodied, there were early signs that this wedding wasn't going to be smooth. Watch closely in the episodes, and you can pick up on the small cues. The way certain siblings avoided long eye contact, the awkward seating arrangements, the way conversations seemed clipped instead of warm. And it wasn't just about Kim and Barry. The kids themselves have been fractured for years. Ethan and Olivia have long been on the outskirts, carrying the weight of old conflicts. Mariah has had her moments of rebellion and heartbreak. Micah, once eager to leave home and carve out his own independence, now found himself face to face with Isaac, one of the younger siblings who stayed aligned more closely with their parents. This isn't just about personality differences, it's about loyalty. For the Plaths, loyalty has always been tested in dramatic public ways. Lydia's wedding became another stage for that test. Who would sit with whom? Who would acknowledge Olivia? Who would speak kindly? And who would let their resentment show? Even the presence or absence of certain guests carried heavy meaning. When Veronica entered the picture, her role as Micah's girlfriend wasn't just about being a +1. It became symbolic of whether outsiders would be welcomed or silently rejected. And of course, Olivia's strained relationship with Kim cast a long shadow. By the time Lydia walked down the aisle, it should have been her moment. But what we were watching was a family trying desperately to hold their cracks together under the pressure of cameras, expectations, and unresolved grudges. The vows, the flowers, the music, it was all there. Yet the tension was stronger than the decorations, and the story was already writing itself. This wasn't going to end with unity. This was the calm before the storm, a fragile setup for a wedding day that would become one of the most talked about episodes in Plathville's history. If there's one thing longtime viewers of Welcome to Plathville know, it's that the Plath family has never handled outsiders well. From the very first season, the theme has been the same. If you're not one of us, then your every move will be scrutinized, doubted, and often blamed for the family's problems. Lydia's wedding only magnified that dynamic, because who shows up to a wedding, or who doesn't, says more than words ever could. Let's start with Olivia. Her rocky history with Kim Plath has been one of the show's central storylines for years. We've watched the shouting matches, the tense standoffs, the cold shoulders. Olivia married Ethan and almost instantly became a lightning rod for criticism, accused of pulling him away from his parents and corrupting the Plath values. But what was really happening was much simpler. Olivia encouraged Ethan to think for himself, to set boundaries, and to live a life outside of the rigid bubble he grew up in. For Kim, that was unforgivable. And for Lydia's wedding, it meant that Olivia's presence or absence wasn't just about whether she wanted to celebrate, it was loaded with years of unresolved hostility. Fans saw how Olivia's strained relationship with Ethan and the wider family cast a shadow on every family event leading up to this wedding. Remember those earlier episodes where family gatherings turned icy the second Olivia walked into the room, or when conversations would abruptly stop when she entered? Lydia's wedding carried that same energy. Even when Olivia wasn't the focus, you could feel her absence being talked about just as much as her presence. It became a no-win situation. If she came, she risked reigniting old fights. If she didn't, it looked like proof that she wasn't part of the family. Then there's Veronica, Micah's girlfriend. Her role may have seemed smaller at first glance, but symbolically, it was huge. For Micah, who has openly embraced a more independent lifestyle since leaving home, bringing Veronica into the picture was a statement. She wasn't raised in the same strict world, and she represented a life outside the family's rules. That alone made her a target for skepticism. The Plaths don't exactly welcome girlfriends or spouses with open arms unless they fall neatly into the mold, and Veronica was never going to. You can trace this pattern all the way back through past seasons. We saw it with Ethan and Olivia. We saw it when Mariah tried to carve out her own path and face judgment not only from her parents but also from some of her siblings. Outsiders aren't just individuals in this story. They're symbols of change, and for a family like the Plaths, change has always been the enemy. Weddings just amplify that tension. Think about it. Weddings are public, they're symbolic, and they're about blending families. But in the Plath world, they've always carried this us versus them narrative. Lydia's wedding wasn't simply about her and her husband starting a new chapter. It became a test of loyalty for everyone else. Who would sit where? Who would acknowledge whom? Who would avoid eye contact? Every little gesture was read as either acceptance or rejection, and for viewers it was clear that the battle lines were drawn before the ceremony even began. The show framed these dynamics in a way that made it impossible to ignore. You could see the discomfort when Veronica was around. You could hear the silence when Olivia's name came up. And you could sense that for Lydia, this was heartbreaking, because on what should have been her happiest day, her family couldn't just focus on her. Instead, they used her wedding as another stage to play out the same old cycle. Insiders versus outsiders, loyalty versus independence, tradition versus freedom. By the time Micah and Isaac clashed, the groundwork had already been laid. Outsiders had been painted as the root of division, even when the real issue was the family's inability to accept change. The tension had been simmering, and the wedding just gave it the stage to finally boil over. If Lydia's wedding was the stage, then the fight between Micah and Isaac was the tragic climax that nobody could stop watching. For years, Welcome to Plathville has been building toward this kind of eruption. We've seen the fractures between siblings in small cutting remarks and awkward silences. We've seen loyalty divided along invisible lines. But at Lydia's wedding, all of that background tension exploded in the most literal way possible, leaving Micah injured, stitched, and standing as a living, bloodied reminder that this family's wounds aren't just emotional anymore, they're physical. To understand how Micah and Isaac ended up in that moment, you have to go back through their history on the show. Micah was one of the first siblings to really step away from the sheltered life Kim and Barry had built. He moved out, pursued modeling, and started openly living a lifestyle completely different from the one he was raised in. He drank alcohol, he dated, he partied, and for Micah it was freedom. But for Isaac, the youngest son who stayed more loyal to the family's traditional values, Micah's choices looked like betrayal. This tension didn't come out of nowhere. We've seen it across seasons in the way Isaac has defended his parents, especially Barry, while Micah has pushed back against their authority. Micah wasn't just rejecting rules, he was rejecting the entire system that Isaac still believed in. So even though they're brothers, their lives became proof of two different paths the Plath kids could take, one toward independence, one toward obedience. That difference sat between them like a wall, and Lydia's wedding, with all its pressure to look like a family, only made that wall taller. By the time the wedding day arrived, Micah and Isaac weren't walking in as neutral brothers. They were walking in carrying years of resentment, and with emotions running high, it didn't take much for everything to unravel. The cameras didn't sugarcoat it. One minute you saw stiff interactions and tense glances, and the next you saw the fallout. Micah bloodied, his face stitched, a shocking image that became the symbol of the entire event.
A wedding meant to mark a new beginning had turned into a battleground where two brothers physically clashed. Micah's injury wasn't just a random accident or a minor scuffle. The stitches on his face were a literal marker of what happens when years of unspoken anger finally boil over. It was impossible for fans to look at him and not feel the weight of it. This wasn't the product of one bad day. It was years in the making. Think about how many times we've seen the older Plaths try to reach out to the younger ones, only to be shut down or misunderstood. Think about how Isaac, still deeply tied to Barry and Kim, would bristle when his siblings criticized their upbringing. That tension never disappeared, and the wedding simply forced it into the spotlight. If you compare this clash to earlier sibling disputes, the difference is clear. We've seen verbal confrontations before, Mariah lashing out during her heartbreak, Ethan cutting off contact with his parents, Olivia refusing to play by Kim's rules. But those fights were contained to words and ultimatums. Micah and Isaac's fight crossed a line the family hadn't crossed on camera before. It turned physical, and once blood is spilled, you can't pretend everything is fine. The alliances that formed around this fight also told a story. Some siblings quietly sided with Micah, understanding his push for independence and freedom. Others leaned toward Isaac, seeing him as the one still holding the family's original values together. Lydia, stuck in the middle on her own wedding day, became the heartbreaking figure caught between two versions of her family. What should have been her moment was overshadowed by her brothers turning her wedding into a spectacle of division. And this is why fans were so stunned when the episode aired, because while we've always known the Plaths were fractured, we hadn't seen it come to blows like this. Micah's stitched face wasn't just shocking television, it was the family's history carved into his skin. Years of mistrust, of harsh rules, of siblings being forced to choose sides, finally left a scar you could see. This fight wasn't a one-off. It wasn't just about that day or one disagreement. It was the inevitable result of a family raised under extremes. Extremes of control, extremes of loyalty, extremes of rejection. And Micah and Isaac, standing on opposite sides of that spectrum, finally collided in a way that no amount of flowers, vows, or carefully staged photos could cover up. Lydia's wedding became unforgettable, not because of the romance, but because it showed the world that the Plaths' wounds are deeper than anyone imagined.
When you pull back from the chaos of Lydia's wedding and look at the Plath family as a whole, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just about a fight between Micah and Isaac, or a day that went wrong. It's about a cycle of loyalty and control that has defined the Plath family from the very beginning. Every major conflict we've watched on Welcome to Plathville ties back to this same push and pull. Who gets to be free, who stays loyal, and who pays the price when someone dares to step outside the lines. Let's rewind. From the earliest episodes, Kim and Barry's parenting philosophy wasn't just about raising children. It was about absolute authority. The Plath kids grew up under strict rules. No mainstream music, no sugar, no dating, no unfiltered friendships with people outside their circle. The family home itself was painted as a safe haven from the corrupting influence of the world. But what looked like protection from the outside was control on the inside. For the kids, life was a constant test of loyalty. Prove you're obedient. Prove you're faithful. Prove you won't betray the family by wanting more. As the children grew older, that system started to splinter. The older siblings, Ethan, Mariah, Micah, were the first to question it. Ethan pushed back by marrying Olivia, a partner who refused to bend to Kim's authority. Mariah turned to music, clothing, and her own sense of style as an act of rebellion. Micah left to model and party, rejecting the farm life entirely. Each of them chose freedom, and in doing so they broke the silent contract of loyalty Kim and Barry had enforced for years. And what happened next was predictable. They were punished. Through cold shoulders, cutting remarks, or being cut off entirely, those siblings became outsiders in their own family. But while the older kids sought independence, the younger siblings, Lydia, Isaac, Amber, were still bound to the system. They clung to tradition, sometimes by choice, sometimes by fear. Lydia in particular became the good daughter, the one who prayed, who obeyed, who stayed home. Isaac, loyal to Barry especially, mirrored that devotion, holding the line against the corrupting influence of his older siblings. This divide created two camps within the same family, one chasing freedom, the other defending tradition. And the tension between those camps has driven almost every episode we've seen. Lydia's wedding exposed this cycle in the clearest way yet. On the surface, a wedding should be a unifier. It's supposed to bring family together, to celebrate love and stability. But in the Plath family, it only magnified the divide. Every decision around the wedding, who was invited, who was welcomed, who was excluded, became a test of loyalty. Olivia's presence, Veronica's relationship with Micah, even the way Barry and Kim interacted under the same roof again. Each detail was a reminder that in this family, control and allegiance matter more than joy. The fight between Micah and Isaac didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the natural expression of the bigger cycle. Isaac, representing the younger loyalists, couldn't stomach Micah's defiance. Micah, embodying the older siblings' rebellion, refused to bow down anymore. Their clash was the physical form of a conflict that has been brewing since the very first time Ethan dared to say no to Kim. Micah's stitched face wasn't just the mark of a fight, it was the latest scar in a family defined by scars, most of them invisible until that night. Think about the pattern. Every Plath who chooses independence is branded disloyal. Every Plath who stays obedient is rewarded, but also trapped. Weddings, birthdays, family gatherings, all the events meant to symbolize unity, instead become battlegrounds where this cycle plays out again and again. Ethan and Olivia's marriage was torn apart by the same system. Mariah's search for identity was framed as rebellion. And now Lydia's wedding, meant to be her day, became the latest stage for loyalty to be tested and control to be enforced. What makes this cycle so powerful is that it keeps repeating. Kim and Barry may be divorced now, but their influence is still there. Barry's quiet, stern loyalty to the rules still has Isaac defending the old ways. Kim's manipulative, overbearing tactics still echo in Lydia's desire to do right by her family. Even when the parents aren't center stage, their legacy of control dictates how the kids treat each other. That's why these fights feel inevitable. The cycle doesn't need Kim and Barry to be in the room. It lives inside the siblings themselves. Lydia's wedding was supposed to break that cycle, to be a moment where love and unity outweighed the past, but instead, it revealed just how deeply ingrained it all is. Guests could see the fractures, viewers could feel the tension, and when Micah stood there bloodied, stitched, and raw, it was the perfect metaphor. No matter how many times this family tries to put on a united front, the old wounds always reopen, and that's why fans were shaken. Because weddings are supposed to be new beginnings. But for the Plaths, this wedding wasn't a beginning at all. It was a repetition of the same cycle we've been watching for years. Control, loyalty, rebellion, punishment, over and over again. Lydia may have said "I do," but what the audience saw was a family still locked in a dance they don't know how to stop. When the dust settled after Lydia's wedding, the flowers were still standing, the vows had been said, and the guests were still smiling for photos. But make no mistake, the damage had already been done. Micah's stitched face was impossible to ignore, and the energy in the room had shifted. What should have been a memory of joy turned into yet another Plath family scar, and the fallout from that night rippled far beyond the ceremony itself. Inside the family, the responses were telling. Some siblings tried to minimize the clash, acting as though everything was fine, as though Micah's injury was just one of those things that happens when emotions run high. Others were clearly shaken, caught between their loyalty to Isaac and their sympathy for Micah. Lydia, in particular, became the image of heartbreak, her wedding overshadowed, her joy interrupted, and her position as the good daughter forcing her to smooth over the very cracks that ruined her big day. Barry and Kim, though divorced, couldn't hide the roles they played in creating this atmosphere. For years, they set their children against each other through control, favoritism, and loyalty tests. And now, at their daughter's wedding, that legacy was impossible to hide. The audience, of course, saw it all. Social media lit up the moment the episode aired. Fans on Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit were stunned, angry, and heartbroken. Memes circulated of Micah's stitched face with captions like, "Not the wedding souvenir anyone asked for." Others asked why the producers even aired the footage, calling it exploitative and accusing TLC of turning real family trauma into entertainment. Yet just as many fans admitted they couldn't look away. Comments flooded in. "This is what we always knew was brewing. The Plath's cracks are finally showing. I don't think this family will ever recover." That tension between horror and fascination is exactly what the show thrives on. Welcome to Plathville has always walked a fine line between documenting real pain and packaging it as drama. Lydia's wedding was a masterclass in that balance. On one hand, you had a genuine celebration of love. On the other, the cameras never flinched away from the blood, the tears, or the silent glares. Private pain became public spectacle, and the audience was invited not just to witness it, but to analyze it, replay it, meme it, and argue about it. It's a cruel irony. The more the Plaths suffer, the higher the ratings climb, and yet as fans we can't help but ask, what happens now? Can Micah and Isaac reconcile after a clash this brutal? Can Lydia ever look back at her wedding day without remembering the fight that stole the spotlight? Can this family, fractured by years of loyalty and control, actually find healing? Or are they doomed to repeat the same cycle until every relationship is scarred beyond repair? The truth is, reconciliation feels like a long shot. Micah's independence is only growing. Isaac's loyalty to Barry hasn't wavered. Lydia's desire to play peacemaker keeps her stuck in the middle, unable to fully claim her own joy. And with Kim and Barry's divorce still casting a shadow, the Plaths don't have a united foundation to rebuild from. Every attempt at healing feels temporary. Every truce fragile. If history tells us anything, it's that another explosion is only a matter of time. For fans, the tragedy is obvious. We've watched this family grow, splinter, and collide for years. We've hoped for breakthroughs, cheered for moments of joy, and groaned when old patterns reappeared. But Lydia's wedding marked a turning point. It wasn't just another argument, another cold shoulder, another slammed door. It was blood, stitches, and the undeniable truth that this family's pain can no longer be hidden behind smiles and ceremonies.
In the end, the fallout of Lydia's wedding left fans asking one haunting question. If love can't hold this family together on the happiest day of one of their daughters' lives, what could possibly hold them together at all? A wedding day is supposed to be remembered for the vows, the love, the joy that lingers long after the last song fades. But for Lydia Plath, the memories are forever marked by something else entirely. The blood on Micah's face, the tension in the air, and the reminder that her family cannot escape the cycle it's been trapped in for years. What should have been her happiest day became a public reminder of just how deep the fractures in the Plath family truly go. When viewers watched this unfold on Welcome to Plathville, it wasn't just another dramatic moment for television. It was heartbreaking. Because underneath the cameras and the editing, you could see real people hurting, real siblings tearing each other apart, and a young woman forced to watch her celebration turn into a cautionary tale of what happens when family control and old wounds are left to fester. Micah's injury was more than just a physical mark. It was a symbol, a stitched-up face that told the truth. The Plaths have spent years trying to cover. This family's pain isn't going away. You could feel it in the silence between siblings, in the forced smiles, in the way every guest knew something had gone terribly wrong. And you could sense it in Lydia herself, torn between wanting to believe in unity and having to accept that unity may never come. For longtime fans, it felt like the breaking point we all saw coming. We've watched smaller arguments, passive-aggressive digs, and quiet avoidance play out season after season. But this was different. This was physical, undeniable, and impossible to edit away. And now the question hangs heavy. Is there any way forward for the Plaths, or have they finally crossed a line they can't come back from? And that's where I want to hear from you. Do you think Micah and Isaac can ever truly reconcile after this fight? Do you think Lydia will ever be able to remember her wedding without the shadow of this clash? Or is this family so locked into loyalty tests and cycles of control that peace just isn't possible anymore? Hi friends, I'm Sophie, and this is Reality Scandals Daily. If you've been following along, you know I don't just recap, I get into the heart of these stories, the human side behind the cameras. And I want you to join this conversation, because your perspective matters. Whose side are you on? Do you feel for Micah, for Isaac, for Lydia caught in the middle? Drop your thoughts down below. I read every single comment, and I know our community always brings sharp emotional insight to moments like this. And if you don't want to miss what happens next with this family, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with anyone who's been watching Plathville from the beginning. Because the truth is, this story isn't over. If this wedding taught us anything, it's that the Plaths are still carrying battles that go far deeper than what we see on the surface. And here on Reality Scandals Daily, we'll be following every step, every twist, and every heartbreaking reveal together. So let's keep the conversation alive. Was Lydia's wedding just one bad night, or was it the moment the Plath family finally showed us who they really are?